Morning, Daniel.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine. I didn't realise Andy didn't have the Zoom link for this meeting, our speaker for today.
Oh, right.
So I forwarded that to him. I'm in the Philippines at the moment, so I don't know how good my connection will be.
Right.
For the first 30 minutes, I'm going to ask the question, does anyone want to be part of the ICN committee? That's the topic to begin with. That's kind of roundtable topic. We've got a number of people standing down, and basically, there's me, there's John left, I think. I've sent out a few emails. I've not had any real positive responses back, so I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be difficult for me and John Medhurst, who isn't here today, to run the committee on our own, sort of thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean to say that today is the last meeting. It just means to say that if we don't get two people at least who want to be committee members, we need to look elsewhere to find them, and pretty sharpish, as it were.
Yeah.
So just to let you know, that's the situation.
No, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. I sincerely hope that Andy has got the my message and does turn up. Otherwise, this is going to be a bit of a damp squid, and doesn't bode well for future meetings, unfortunately. If our speaker hasn't got the Zoom link. So yeah. I don't know. Do you know if Karen advertised? Because I did send to Karen some advertisements regarding the committee roles, etc. Did Karen send out? Did Karen get any feedback on anyone who wanted to join the committee? I'm going to assume not. Otherwise,
yeah, she hasn't advised me on anyone that's provided interest, but I know that she's done outreach and promoted it through the groups. But she hasn't advised me of anyone, like you said, that's come back yet.
Okay. The last meeting was quite unsuccessful, as we had about 3 people turn up. So I'm just hoping that Andy Harrison, if he turns up, is a big enough draw to bring in a number of people, as it were.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
So, fingers crossed. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else from your point of view that we need to discuss?
No, I don't think so. When Karen's back in, I'll update her as well, like you said, about the committee and general interests and stuff like that. But no, I think that's it, really.
Did Karen come back to you with people who may want to attend today, particularly for the 10 o'clock talk?
She has not. I've just been told to start the Zoom link.
Okay.
So okay. I don't have a list.
Usually I get told. Usually Karen sends me an email and just says, it says it's 5 people or 10 people. Just gives me a number. She doesn't tend to give me names or anything like that. Yeah.
I can try and look in. I can try and look in the back end and see if I can find anything.
Wouldn't worry too much. We're sort of like
there's it looks like 9 registered.
Okay, that's
9
not
registered
a good number
in the back end.
Okay, that's not a particularly good number because, about 2/3 of them won't turn up. I tend to find these things. So we get 3, maybe 4, maybe a couple of other people who haven't actually registered as yet will register, as it were, for the talk. I'm just going to check the emails.
Like you said, you normally will get about half or a third based on that.
Okay. Well, Andy's just confirmed he's attending.
Well, that's good.
That's good news. Cool. In the absence of John, like I say, if I disappear, and hopefully I won't disappear before 10 o'clock, because once 10 o'clock comes, Andy kind of takes over, and we'll let him talk But if I disappear before that, if you could take over, sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, but basically, first half hour, the idea is we're just looking for people who want to join the committee. So
yeah, no worries. I'll stay in the background and keep a listen out just in case.
Yeah, because I got the very I wouldn't say worrying email. Well, worrying, yeah. I mean, it was a bit of a shock when I got the email a few days ago, which basically said the criminal justice SIG is closing. Yeah, which that really shocked me, because I always thought that one, they've got a OR departments. I worked with sort of like the Justice Ministry of Justice recently, about a year ago now, but and they've got lots of analysts in many departments who sort of like involved with criminal justice. So it's just a shame you can't get the people to actually run the SIGs.
Yeah, it's so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I've found the last year quite struggling trying to find speakers for various different events, and it's all become a bit ad hoc because I've been dealing with other things and working, etc., and things like that. So you do need a good committee around you. You do need about 4 or 5 people, I think. Not too big, but
Yeah, I think as well, having, like you said, that amount in a committee, it helps with the reach and everything, doesn't it? But to be fair, we've noticed similar in certain, like larger events that we do as well. It's the target market's out there, but it's finding them and having the market research to then find them, which you definitely get from having those committee members who are in different circles as well.
Yeah. Part of the problem with the original committee, which for this ICN, was that I think we had about 3 defence people on the committee, at least 3, 4 defence, 4 defence people, which which meant it became difficult for us to find people outside of defence, as it were. So I mean, we all knew people who obviously independent consultants in defence, but outside of that, no, nothing. Okay. Right. Okay, so it's now 4:30. No one's rushing to join at the moment.
No.
I take it. I mean,
they do.
Yeah. Usually it does sort of like take a few minutes for people to join.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of people will click the link at 9:30, and then it takes a few minutes for it to load.
Over here it's 4:30 for me, which is a bit of an issue, because it's difficult to arrange meetings which are convenient for everybody. But
yeah, I can imagine. Time difference is strange at the best of times.
Yeah.
So there's someone waiting now.
Okay. Oh, Nav. That's Nav. That's excellent.
So it looks like people are joining.
Cool. Okay, connecting to also that's. Cool.
Morning, Dan.
Hi, Nav. Hiya, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah. So we got UC Henna connecting to audio.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi,
how are
you? Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Have you recovered from the conference? A couple of weeks seems to be very, very distant now, isn't it?
Yeah, just about. I'm getting there.
Jane, good. A few people. Hi, Jane.
Hello.
Bella. That's a good number. for those who are joining, we're just going to wait a minute or two just to see if anyone else joins. So, you know, make yourself a coffee, yeah, get a footstool, something like that. How's everyone doing?
Good, busy. That's the way it should be.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I'm in the Philippines at the moment, so hence the sort of like slightly subdued lighting, because although it's still daylight outside, the sun is going down. So
what's the weather like?
The weather has been fun, actually. We've had a typhoon pass by.
Yeah.
Right.
But we've also had temperatures between 25 to 30 plus degrees. So, you know.
Very pleasant. I'm heading off to Nepal tomorrow.
Lovely. Yeah.
We'll go.
Yeah.
Are you at Philippines for work or play?
Play, it's holiday. So, you know, we're just here. We hadn't had a holiday since 2018.
Yeah,
like most people.
When you can do it again, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're actually out here until mid-November. We're back on the 9th of November.
Fantastic.
So,
have fun. Yeah. Yes, I'm just wondering if my legs remember how to trek in the Himalayas after 3 years off.
yeah. Well, we've got to remember everything. Like, you know, you've got to have well, you may well do in Nepal as well, but you know, you've got to have mosquito cream here, and you've got to sort of like have sun lotion all the time with you.
That's right. Yes.
Things you don't think about when you're in the UK most of the time.
Well, luckily, yeah. I've got a trekking bag. I just sort of whip it out of the cupboard, and then, as you say, find that all my sunscreens and everything like that are out of date. But anyhow.
Right, we're just going to wait for Nav to get back, and then we'll sort of like we'll get started. So if he's not back in a couple of minutes, I'll probably get started anyway. But he's definitely online. Right. So hi Nav.
Hi. Good morning.
Since it's 5 minutes in now, I'm going to get started with the first topic of the day. We do have later on, we have for your enjoyment, we have a talk by Andy Harrison, a well-known speaker in the OR Society, about delivering business value with AI and bridging the gap between hype and reality. So just be aware that is upcoming, but wanted to start today. The ICN has been successful. The Independent Consultants Network has been successful over the last few years in a lot of ways, but in other ways, less so. There's been sort of like, in terms of meetings, etc., they haven't been as regular as the committee would have liked, etc. And the committee is very keen to get new blood on it. So what I want to do is just have a discussion. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I have been contacting people. Some of you will be aware of that. Don't want to put anyone on the spot, but what I want to do is have a discussion about how we can attract people to the committee to help organize future Independent Consultant Network events and move the network forward in a robust way. Now, a couple of us from the committee are definitely staying on at the moment, but I just want to sort of like throw it out. I'm probably going to ask Nav to start, if that's okay, Nav, on the basis that you've been part of the committee, etc., and what your ideas, what your ideas are on running a successful SIG group and how we can improve on what we've done so far. So if I get Nav to start, and then we'll go do a round table. That's partially Nav because you're right next to me on the
right
on the list of videos.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, so I'm based in the University of Exeter Business School, and I'm a professor of analytics and operations management. I think it was a couple of years now that when I was the chair for all the SIGs of the OR Society, And during that time, I think I worked with Dan to set up the SIG, this particular SIG. And we had a committee, then I'm a member of the committee as well. And so it's been around 2 years now that the SIG has been, going forward with meetings and all. A lot of them actually steered by Dan himself. So from my experience, it would be good to have more members in the committee. And when I mention about experience, it is because I'm also involved with SIG simulation, that is a special interest group. But we have a lot of members there, right? Because the simulation community is quite robust in the UK. We have a journal, the Journal of Simulation, also the simulation workshops, which is a biennial event held every 2 years. Next one is in Southampton. So what I found for SIG simulation is that we had a good number of academics and practitioners who were involved in the SIGs, and therefore it became easier for us to hold these events, right? But again, Dan, I mean, you have been doing, I think, two events a year, sometime even 3. So that is a good number. So for some of the SIGs, actually, the number of events is not even, 2 a year. And that has also led in previous years for some of these, SIGs to be dismantled in a way. So I think for the SIG to succeed, what we would like to have is, a broader membership. And then, the meetings that we organize, if there is a good participation, and under the leadership of the chair of the SIG and the secretary, if there is a distribution of responsibility for organizing these talks, I think then that works well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, just before we move on to the next one, for those of you who don't know, I just heard recently, I got an email through just the other day that one of the SIGs, the criminal justice SIG in the UK, is actually closing down, unfortunately. This was a bit of a surprise to me because, I thought that, I've worked with the Ministry of Justice once, etc. And, I thought there was a strong sort of like community and there'd be plenty of people to run those. So I know that it can be difficult to run these special interest groups. But again, I'd like to move on now and just apologies if I get your name wrong. It's Yusi Chena or Chena?
Yeah, Uchena. UCHE. Yeah, Uchena. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so again, not putting you on the spot, but how can we go about expanding the special interest group, the special interest groups committee, so that we can have a robust committee moving forward? We only need, I think, 4 or 5 people in total, who can then who can organize events so that you can come along and enjoy them, sort of thing. Do you have any ideas, any thoughts, etc.?
For me, I would use myself as a point of reference. Obviously this is my first time, and the whole idea was, it came into my mail, and I read through it and just caught my fascination. So I was like, okay, let me come in, see what is happening, and see if it's something that aligns to my interests majorly. So I'd say we need to leverage on the power of social media and the career network, and the go-to place is LinkedIn. So I think we can actually leverage on the LinkedIn platform to look at professionals, especially in the analytics field, and push out this information across to them and let them know something like this is actually existing actually. You understand? So I think by doing that, leveraging on that platform, we should be able to at least get some very good professionals that are very curious, just like myself, to come in and try to understand what the group is all about. You understand? That's one key aspect I think will actually go along with contributing. Then secondly, also I feel structuring out the group in terms of trying to allot this in the structure to how the group operates, because I think I saw where it was said in the email that was forwarded to me, or some of the content for today's meeting, they had to create some members, or more like committee members, because you need people to try to strat out the plan going forward majorly. So I think the first thing is get the plans right, get the people that would make up the plan, And once you have a committee of strong, committed people that are ready to like push or pivot the plans of the seed forward, then leverage a professional platform like LinkedIn to see how to like push these plans out there and get more interest from people.
Cool, brilliant, thank you. Yeah, some nice couple of ideas there. If you heard some tapping on a keyboard, that was me. I was just taking a couple of notes there. If that's okay. Cool, thank you. I particularly like the idea of using social media. Jane, you're next in my queue. Would you mind just giving your thoughts on this topic?
Oh dear, yes. I knew you were going to ask me. I've been involved in OR committees for a very long time now, and the only thing that makes them work is an enthusiastic chair, basically. And certainly the one that you said, the justice one that's just folded, that had a single very enthusiastic chair, Sue Merchant, for a long time. And once she stepped down, there wasn't any replacement. And just how you finger an enthusiastic person, go on, Dan, you're enthusiastic. I don't know, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is difficult, you know, I mean, yeah, finding that enthusiastic leader. I think what you need, I disagree slightly there in the fact I feel that you need at least, I would say ideally you want a couple of really enthusiastic people on the committee, sort of thing, you know, and then sort of like, and for want of a better term, you know, a number of others who are willing to give their thoughts on sort of like speakers and things like that, or, you know, what can go into events. Whereas sort of like if you've got a couple who are chairing and being vice chairing or being the secretary for a committee, then you've then you've got the organisation there. If they're enthusiastic, and everyone else is more of a case of, right, here's what I think we can do for the next event. You know, I think that's the key thing. That's the way I sort of like view it anyway. Cool. Bala, you're next on my list. Do I got that right, Bala?
Yeah. So I think this is the first time I'm attending this specific committee. I work in supply chain space, and most of our product in the industry is to do with optimization and decision making. And yeah, only this year I could actually take time to invest on my learning, and that's how I enrolled myself for the OR Society. Regarding events, I definitely agree with Uchena. Like using LinkedIn platform would be one of the best way to spread the message and share the learning. Unfortunately I don't have a research or an academic background, so I'm purely from functional side. Happy to talk about what happens on the industry if that actually helps. In my organization, I'm also trying to evangelize or build a community on software engineering. AI is at infancy state, but the traditional program is at a good measure. So typically what we do is we do like monthly meetups, which is basically someone presents like these are the topics that I want to talk. We curate that, and then we select like these two speakers can talk on every Wednesday of last month. But then again, there is a bit of hand-holding to check whether those two topics actually mean anything. Now, I don't know how much specifically we can get for operation research, but again, there are a lot of material. The second thing is we do quarterly conferences where I pull in industry experts from Microsoft, Google, academic from MIT, Harvard, and I'm sure OR Society would have a lot of such passionate academic / research people who can shed a lot of light, and also getting feedback after every session. We just send a form saying like what do you want to hear more. You might not be able to pull that session immediately the next month, but that becomes kind of a backlog for us, that we know that, okay, 10 people have asked for it. Let us find a good speaker and try to inspire on these topics. And the last one that we are doing right now is we are partnering with universities as part of our early in career kind of program for placement here, especially in US. And what we are doing is we are giving industry problem as a hackathon. So we are pulling like 20 or 30 students and we are giving like, this is a problem, you solve it and come back and present. So what we get to know is their thought process of how they are unwrapping the problem, how they are defining the problem, and it becomes kind of a presentation. And then you basically give them small rewards like, oh, this was brilliant, we didn't think about it, and it drives creativity. I'm not sure, Daniel, if I have helped much, but I just told what I'm trying to do in my organization.
And all of this is good, sort of thing. Thank you. I much appreciate it. A couple of things that spring to my mind is things that I think things that people make them enthusiastic about running SIGs and joining SIGs, and sorry about that. Just my wife. Just talking to a nephew. Yeah, sorry. Two things that come to my mind is this. First of all, do people understand the benefits? People who are members of the OR Society, do they understand the benefits of actually being part of SIGs or conferences, committees, etc., and things like that they can get from that? I mean, first of all, there's sort of like the networking benefits, obviously, but it also goes towards your what's it called? The
Continuous professional development.
Yeah, continued improvement, your CPD. So that's one thing. The other thing is the support you get from the company that you're part of. Now, I was part of a company called Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, which is actually a government company. Back then, when I first joined the OR Society, they sort of like had certain things going on. They would actually, first of all, they would say, right, you've got to join a society. I was part of the OR department, so I was told you really should join the Operational Research Society, not knowing anything about it. So I joined, and then I was told, well, you've got to continue your professional development. You can do that in several ways, by your good work, by getting involved, etc., and things like that. So I think other companies, don't necessarily push their members, their employees, sorry, to actually be, to necessarily join a professional society. Yeah. So I think that's why, or when if the people do, they don't push them to get accredited or things like that. So I think there's in terms of sort of like increasing enthusiasm, or sort of like getting people to run these SIGs, etc. And I was thinking, there's a lot of people who are part of the UK's criminal justice departments across the government, etc., who work in that. A lot of analysts. Thought to myself, surely there must be at least a few really enthusiastic people who'd want to run a SIG, such as the Criminal Justice Society. Similarly, I believe that there are a number of enthusiastic independent consultants out there who would want to be involved in running the consultants network, of the OR Society. So, moving forward, I'm hoping to keep this the committee running, etc. What I'm planning to do is what I would like you to do for me, those of you who are here today, is if you can think of anyone who might be really enthusiastic about being part of a committee, not necessarily to chair or be the secretary, but sort of like bring ideas, or would like a talk here, or would like to organise a hackathon or something along those lines, or a round table on this, or maybe a practical demonstration of a new, exciting new analytical tool. All of these things, if there's anything like that, would you either feel free to suggest it now or email me, and I will sort of like take it on board, because I do sort of like believe in this network, and I do want to sort of like keep it going. So Yeah. So yeah. So okay. Any thoughts from anyone else?
Yes, Dan. I was also thinking in terms of the mailing list that we have, right? So is it possible? I know that now the mailing list is with the control of the OR Society. It makes it a bit difficult, but maybe if you can compose a message and send it to Caitlin, for example, she can then promote and this as well, and the request for new members of the committee. I found it to be very useful when I was running the SIG simulation, the mailing list. I think you're muted, Dan.
Apologies. An email has been composed and was sent to Karen for sending out. I need to follow up on that to find out, you know, what feedback we have. But yes, a very good idea. Thank you, Nav. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Since we if you could I don't know if you could drop in your email, so definitely once ideas comes up, we could actually reach out to you through email.
I'll just dump my email in the chat.
So Dan, I mean, we are not looking at research presentations, right? So basically it has to be a practitioner focused presentation. Yeah. So that is the
it would depend. I mean, in general, we would be looking at practitioners because obviously independent consultants tend to be practitioners. However, if we're talking about new techniques which we think might be of use to independent consultants, then I'm not against looking at sort of like something from a more academic research perspective.
Right.
I think there's a lot that the Independent Consultants Network can actually derive from academia, etc. So,
Dan, one thing which is quite popular in the US geography, at least when I did my master's, was we used to get research assistants like the fellow, which certain universities like Harvard and MIT used to do, where the industry. So if I'm happy to volunteer, say 8 hours a week, I would be tied up with a research team, and generally I'm not paid for any of those things, but it might be small things like managing their calendar, understanding what they're doing, setting up, you know, research questions, things like that, which was a learning opportunity for me, as well as I was getting a, you know, an incentive saying like, yeah, you were part of this team for short-term internship is a bad word, fellowship. I'm not sure if that's something that that's something that we could leverage, because if you're saying we have consultant who are having industry expert, that's something that can bridge with the research. And I'm very passionate. I'm trying to now do an independent auditor for ethical AI solution, which is based on UK GDPR, you know, framework. Again, the framework is so academic and it's binary. It's either 0 or 1. But when you try to apply an AI solution on an industry specific solution, you need to tease that framework or criteria so that you are compliant to that law. It's not binary in the real world. So that's where I find fascinating. It's a problem. How can I solve it? And, you know, again, just an idea that will reach out to more people who are members and non-members as well.
just suddenly realised I was on mute. Hi. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. That's very sort of like interesting. A second Daniel Tully seemed to join us, but I think that's because Andy is using our my link that was sent.
That would be why I can't find myself, Dana.
Quick welcome to our main speaker for today. We will get started with Andy's talk shortly. We've just been having a chat, Andy, about sort of like running the ICN, etc. So, perhaps I could sort of like just throw the question at you slightly. I've been asking about how do you sort of like, we're looking to expand the committee to improve sort of like the diversity and improve sort of like just get a sort of like robust series of talks or roundtables or other events happening each year. And not wanting to put anyone on the spot, but what we're looking to do is ideas on how we might actually do that expansion, who we might go to, where we might go, thoughts on how we might approach it.
Is that to me? That's thrown to me.
That's to you. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there. If you don't have an answer, that's not a problem, sort of thing.
So I'm sure there's people I can put you in touch with who are independent consultants. There was, I assume you're aware of Jigsaw. If Jigsaw's still going.
No, it's not.
No, sorry, my audio's not that great here.
Okay.
But
No, Jigsaw's just about defunct now.
Okay, so I won't suggest getting in touch with Jigsaw then. In terms of diversity, I think the key thing is to make some effort, and once you've made some effort, it's build some momentum. When I was running the IMA's West Midlands branch, one of the things we noticed was that the speakers were all tend to be white males, and we realised that was because all of the branches were just recycling the same speakers over and over again. So we made a conscious effort to get a more diverse set of speakers, which then fed into all of the branches. So it takes some effort, but once you've sort of started that, it does get some momentum of its own. And yeah, there's names I can give you to try and expand the network, but nothing more insightful than that on the spot. But I can take it away and have a think about it.
well, Andy, I really appreciate, I know I did kind of put you on the spot there because you only just joined sort of thing. You didn't see the first 20 minutes, but thank you very much for that. That was very, very useful and very, very interesting. It is 10 o'clock. Well, it is, I believe 10 o'clock your time now. It's 5 o'clock my time because I'm in the Philippines. But 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'm 7 hours ahead. But basically, I would like to introduce everyone who's here today to Andy Harrison, who is going to give us a talk now on delivering business value with AI, bridging the gap between hype and reality. I met Andy on a few occasions during my life. We've never had sort of like a real chance to work together or sort of like organise an event or committee together, but everyone speaks very highly of Andy, and I'm really looking forward to this talk today. And so I'll just hand over to Andy with no further ado, and I look forward to listening intently. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Dan. I shall just right. Yes, that looks promising. Hopefully you can a minute. Can you see my screen, or is it complaining that it can't?
Not at the moment, Andy.
Right. Apologies for this. It's saying I need to go to the settings and let Zoom do it, but I can't. Oh, you've got to be kidding. It's grayed out. So let's Zoom. How annoying.
I wonder if it's because, sorry, Andy, I wonder if it's because because you've logged in as me because you didn't have the link initially and I sent it to you.
Right.
I was wondering, can you quickly send me the slides and I can share them and you can say next slide every time?
Okay, yeah,
Not
I can do
ideal.
that. Not ideal, but rather than everyone sitting here for 10 minutes watching me fail to work out how to do my own settings.
Alternatively, if Caitlin, if you've got a separate link for Andy that you can quickly send him, that'd be great.
Right. Why is it with these things you always spend the first 5 minutes actually trying to work out how to present? Right, I've sent the slides to you, Dan.
Okay,
Oh, is it Dan or is it Daniel?
Daniel.tilly.
Yeah,
275.
Yeah, I've just replied to the email. So hopefully you should get them any second.
Yeah. Aha. I've received them.
Excellent.
Just give it a few minutes. I'll just a minute or two when I just
While you're getting the slides up, I'll just sort of start. I had a bit so I was going to say over the title slide, so I can start talking about that. Whilst let's get sorted. So thanks again for the intro, Dan. Thanks for inviting me. Really looking forward to it. I was going to say good morning, but if you're in the Philippines, I don't know where everybody else is. So it might be good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm aiming to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes. I want to try and leave plenty of time for questions and for any discussion. Apologies in advance, I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice may not hold out all the way through. We shall just have to see. And also, having chatted beforehand, I'm working on the assumption that you have very limited knowledge, very limited knowledge of what AI actually is. So I'll say a bit about what AI is, and go through some of the sort of the basics that support what I'm talking about. I should warn you, Dan, there are builds on the slides. So when I say next slide, just hit next slide, and the build will hopefully come up and hopefully work. Yeah, what I want to talk about today really is the practical challenges of delivering with AI, and I'll say what I mean by AI in shortly. There are a lot of really powerful tools and really powerful services out there that can really help business and really transform business. But there is a lot of hype about what they can achieve, and when you get to a practical problem, you often encounter a lot of challenges getting the performance that the marketing literature claims you can get out of the box. So I'm going to talk about that and how we can tackle some of those things. So it's about bridging that gap between what I'm to call the hype of AI and the reality of actually delivering on the ground. But it can transform businesses, and there's a lot of tools there that make it easy to implement it. In terms of questions, feel free to ask questions as we go along. Don't wait to the end, but like I say, hopefully we'll have time for some questions and to have a chat at the end. So next slide, please. Perfect. So I thought I'd start by saying a bit about who I am, introduce myself a bit. So as Dan said, I'm Andy Harrison. This is me, a picture of some of my astrophotography, because I like doing astrophotography and I like showing it off to people. But I've been doing OR, data science, analytics, whatever you want to call it, for about 30 years. Next slide, please. Should start the build. Perfect. So I started off, I did a pure maths degree. I was sponsored by the Ministry of Defence, and I spent my summers working at a place called the Royal Signals and Radar Establishment, RSRE, in Malvern in the West Midlands. I was there for about 10 years. During that time, RSRE became DRA, the Defence Research Agency, then the DERA, the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency, and ultimately became Kinetic, but I left before then. And it was a really interesting place to work. It was about getting on for 3,000 people worked there, and we were all doing research of some sort. It was like a huge university campus, but without the students and the lecturing. And there's some really interesting technological advances that came out of there. It was set up to support the early radar research during the Second World War, but also liquid crystal displays, which I know these days when you talk to young young people, they don't know, I was familiar with them, but liquid crystal displays, that technology was invented at RSRE, and there was a whole department of about 150 scientists who were funded based on the patents and the back patent payments from Sony in there. Lots of technology behind CDs was invented there. But in the context of today's talk, I worked in a department that was doing some of the foundational work in speech recognition, image recognition, signal processing, pattern recognition. And I did a lot of work in combinatorial optimization and genetic algorithms while I was there. But the group I was in, there was one person in particular who was doing work in neural networks. Excuse me. And back then in the early 90s, a neural network was one input layer, one hidden layer, and one output layer. And he was doing work with 10 hidden layers. And the general consensus was, well, why? It's, what's the point of having such a big, complicated neural network? And then we fast forward 30 years, and a deep network will have thousands, tens of thousands of layers. So it was interesting to be there at the foundation of the the early days of neural networks and machine learning, what we now call artificial intelligence. Although I wasn't aware of it, we were sort of on somewhere in the second AI winter. So it's been interesting to have that historical context and move on from there. So after about 10 years there, I decided I wanted more commercial experience. Joined a couple of startups, did really well at choosing startups that were failing. So, I spent 6 to 9 months in 2 startups, and then I went back to an organization called DSTL. So next slide, please. Oh, okay, the build is broken. No, that's fine. So DSTL, Defense Science and Technology Laboratory. Sedera became Kinetic, but at the same time, it about a third or a quarter of what was DERA got taken out to create the Defense and Science and Technology Laboratory, and that was providing scientific and technology advice, and continues to do so to the Ministry of Defence. Spent several years there, and that's where I learned about the breadth of OR, and sort of more soft methods and facilitation, and supporting business cases and working with stakeholders more. So it's a great time there, and then after about 5 years there, for a number of reasons, I moved on again. So next slide. And I moved on to an engineering company called Atkins, worked in their defense business and then their highways business, again, applying OR and analytics across a breadth of organizations. And then I accidentally, rather serendipitously, found out that my dream job was being advertised in the next slide. So I joined FITO, and FITO, I always describe FITO as one of the most influential companies you've never heard of. They do a lot of financial services, and if you've ever gone for a loan, a mortgage, or a credit card, their modeling in the background will be making decisions in about, I think, 60% of the cases globally, 90% of the cases in the US. But I joined them to start their optimization practice. They develop one of the leading optimization solvers, Express, and I led their consultancy practice, building solutions on top of Express across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, across energy, finance, retail, a number of sectors, and worked there for quite a while. Really enjoyed it, loved it. But then I felt it was time for a move upwards, and something different. So next slide, please. So I went to work for UCAS, the University College and Admission Service, University and Colleges Admission Service. And anybody in the UK who's been at university will be very familiar with UCAS, because that's how you apply to university. And I led their analytical product development team, and our job was to take all of the data, the 25 years of data of university applications that UCAS had, and develop value from it so that UCAS could sell that, so into those insights to universities and to schools, and help fund the development of the UCAS platform. I worked there for a couple of years in a head of role, realized didn't like doing head of, I wanted to go back to technical. So next slide, please. So I went to a company called Northrop Grumman. There's a defense company. And at UCAS, as I sort of was modernizing their analytics practice, I started to touch upon machine learning properly. And then at Northrop Grumman, I did a lot of work in various areas of machine learning, AI, deep learning. There for a couple of years, and at the end of this year, I joined a company called Inner Wisdom. Inner Wisdom are an AI machine learning consultancy. There's about 130 of us, I think, 130 of us at the moment. We do everything on AWS. We're very closely wedded to AWS, have a very strong relationship with them. We're one of their, I think, their premier partner in the EMEA or Europe. Last year we were bought by Cognizant, so we're part of Cognizant, but we still have very much our own identity. And a lot of what I'm just talking about is based on my experience with Inner Wisdom. So, next slide, please. And like I said, please dive in with questions at any point. I'm always conscious that this is all very familiar to me, and I may stir to things that aren't obvious to you. So first thing I want to talk about was the potential. I'm going to say what artificial intelligence is in a second, but I want to start with the potential of artificial intelligence. What artificial intelligence can deliver for businesses. And this McKinsey chart sums it quite nicely. By sector, the y-axis is the impact in terms of billions of dollars, and you can see it's hundreds of billions of dollars. And then the x-axis is about the share of the impact from AI, because there's a lot to analytics beyond AI. There's statistical models, there's dashboards, there's basic statistics, there's business intelligence, and what this is showing as well, how much of the impact is coming from AI compared to those, if you like, more traditional approaches. And if you look at retail up there at the top right, over $600 billion, nearly half of the impact is coming from AI. So that's a huge impact in that sector. Transportation, logistics, travel, automotive. There's huge areas for impact there, and AI can completely transform those industries.
Quick question, Andy. Is this global impact and global billions?
I believe it is global, yes.
Thank you.
So there's comments in the comments. Is the talk about robotics just adding robotics to it, or asking if it's robotics included in this?
No, I think robotics is one space where they are heavily investing right now, especially with automated grid vehicles and things like that. Yeah,
if we dive into the applications, which we taught for the whole hour, just on the things like robotics, reinforcement learning, the Internet of Things, and Industry 4.0, and how stream data to come off it. So there's lots and lots of areas. The key message coming across from here is that AI has huge potential. If you even look at the bottom left corner at pharmaceuticals, you're still talking about $100 billion, and more than a quarter of the impact is coming from AI. And the thing that comes from this is that businesses need to invest in AI. And if a business or an organization doesn't invest in AI, it's going to get left behind. And so there's real value that AI can give to business, and we need to be able to embrace that and be able to realize that. Next slide. So I want to talk a bit about what actually is AI and what do we mean by AI. I'm going to talk about it in terms of deep learning. Often people use AI and machine learning interchangeably, but for the context of this talk, I'm going to mean deep learning, deep neural networks, and this is just an example of a schematic of what a deep network can look like. So the image recognition one, I think it's looking at is there a face in the image, and you chuck some images into the input layer at the start, and then it goes through multiple layers. It learns the features. It starts off learning patterns of local contrast, then more high-level facial features. Then it starts to identify whether there's a face in there, and so I've stuck the faces in at the start. The output is yes or no. There's a face there, for example. This is actually relatively small compared to a lot of the networks that are out there, and the ones I'm going to talk about in a second. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about AI and machine learning. So next slide, please. But it's often the black box. Often you don't see those internals, and as we talked about some of the modeling we talked about, these internals are hidden from you. So all you see is the input and then the output. and it's not trivial to understand what's done inside. You need to have a deep understanding of how the models work. You need to have expertise in AI machine learning to understand the internals. And often it's just a black box. You just don't see anything. So that's what I mean by AI. More specifically, I'm going to talk about supervised and distributive models. So in a supervised distributive model, the distributive means you're giving it an example and it's telling you a label on it. It's telling you whether it's a cat, whether it's not a cat, whether it's a face, whether it's not a face, and it can say more sophisticated things than that. And supervised means the model learns, you train it by giving it lots and lots of examples and saying, here's a picture, it's got a face in it. Here's another picture, it hasn't got a face in it. And then it learns that mapping between the examples you give it and the labels you give it. And that's the training part of it. And so we're talking about supervised distributive models. So these are models that you give it examples with what the true actual label is, and then it learns that mapping, and then you can give it other examples, and it can then give you the label. Enforcing a bit more. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about natural language process. This is using the models to understand natural language, understand, in this case, English or any other language. And this is not tabular data, it's completely unstructured. And there's lots of things you can do with natural language. In this example, it's called named entity recognition. So what you've done is you've given the model some text, and then it's finding the entities in that text and labeling them. So at the start, you can see it's found the name Thomas Edward, and it's labeled that as a person. It's found 3rd of August 1977, labeled that as a date. If you go through, it finds sits and it's labeled that as a cardinal. If you look at it too much, you'll notice it's got some of them wrong. But you're giving it some text, and it's coming back with the labels and saying, I've found these entities in this text, and this is what type of entity they are. And so this is the sort of application I'm going to be talking about as we go through the talk. And also, when I was talking a few minutes ago, I was tending to talk about binary problems, binary labeling problems, where you're saying, I've given you an image, it's got a face and it's not got a face in. What we've got here is I'm giving you some text and I'm giving you multiple labels. So I'm labeling multiple things in that. And that's you know, and there's a difference between multi-level and multi-class. So in a multi-class problem, I'd give some text and it say it belongs to this class, and it can only belong to one class. But with multi-label, it's going to throw out multiple labels for a different piece of text. And so these are the sort of problems, applications, should I say, I'm going to be talking about over the next 30 minutes or so. So this is what AI is. There's huge amounts of power. It can transform business, but there are well-known and well-rehearsed limitations to AI that you just need to be aware of. And the first one is explainability. So next slide, please. So to explain what I mean by explainability, this is about explaining how the model makes a prediction. Next slide, please. So here we've got 10 images, and the model is learning to distinguish between an image of a husky and an image of a wolf. And you can see of these images, 8 of them it's got right, but these 2 it's got wrong. So its accuracy is 80%, which sounds quite good. But do we understand why it's making those predictions? Do we understand whether it's making those predictions in a sensible way? So I'm going to ask a question to each of you. If you look at those images, can you tell me what's common about the images of the wolves? I'll put you out your misery. So if you look at the images of the wolves, they all have snow in the background. If you look at the images of the huskies, they don't have snow in the background. They have, a road. They have some greenery. And if you look at the ones it's got wrong, the wolf picture that it thought was a husky doesn't have any snow in the background, and the husky picture that it thought was a wolf has got snow in the background. Next slide, please. And so when you dig into the model and you unpack what's happening inside it and understand what's paying attention, what you find is that the model's paying attention to the snow. It's learned that pictures of wolves have snow in it, pictures of huskies don't have snow in it, which is, it's completely ignored the creature that you're interested in, and it's learned the background of the image. But when the models are black bots, and you see with some of the models I've talked about, that from your perspective of the user, it's a black box. It's really, you don't know that. You've just got, that's 80% accurate. That's great. I've trained it. I've got an 80% accurate model. Everyone's happy. Off it goes into operations, and then it falls over. And there's a couple of things that come out of this that are important. One is the data. The data you need to make sure the data has good quality and has diversity in it, because in this case, that all of the wolves pictures are in snow. But what you want is a mixture of wolves and huskies in snow and not in snow. The other thing to take out of it is the image on the right, where it looks at the attention line. This is an active area of research to understand explainability. There's a lot of research going on there, but it's not a trivial thing to do, to be able to understand what's happening in the models. And when you think about businesses where they've got analysts, or there's a desperate short of data scientists to build these models, they don't necessarily have the skills and the capabilities in the business to come in and dig into the models and understand what's going on in the background. This is where you need to bring in people with expertise in AI who can spend the time and develop that knowledge of what's happening in the background. And if you can't explain why the model's making the predictions, you think it's very hard to interpret the outputs of those models and the decisions that are made on the back of those models. So if you think about regulated sectors like finance or insurance, and you think about GDPR, where you need to explain automated decisions, with these sort of models, it's quite hard to automate them. To explain them, to explain why it's making a decision, which is why in regulated sectors, often things like decision trees, which is just a set of if-then-else rules, are much easier to explain. You can explain why it's made the decision. Where in this case, if I just showed you the left, I don't think you could explain how it was deciding what was a wolf and what was a husky. And following on from that, or not following from, but another limitation, next slide please, is bias in those decisions. So are your models treating distinct subpopulations in a material different way? And a good example of that, one example of that is let's think about finance and credit cards. Let's think of a husband and wife. They live in the same house. They earn the same. They have the same. They work in the same industry. They're the same age. They don't have any children. So you'd expect any credit decision to be pretty much the same. They've got the same, same amount of debt roughly. So you'd expect the credit decision to be the same. But sometimes the models will make different decisions for comparable men and women, and that's bias within the model. And that bias often comes from the data. And the reason I've got this image here is there's an example about 5-6 years ago about AI was being used in some of the states in America. There's an AI product that was being used to sentence people once they've been convicted. And it became clear that there was bias in that sentencing. So that if they're not defendants, two people have been convicted. If one was white and one was black, the black person would get a much more severe sentence handed down by this AI. And when people investigated this and dug into it, there was bias in the data. The historic sentencing was biased along racial lines. And the model had learnt that. And the model will learn, you give it historic data, it will learn what's in the data, it will learn the bias in the data. So it's important to understand your data, understand whether there's any bias in that. And all of this keeps coming back to the same thing. It's about the quality of the labeled data you're using to train your models. It's having sufficient volumes of data and sufficient quality of that data, understand that data. And a theme we'll keep coming back to as we go on is that data is the key thing. People talk about all these wonderful models, but it is garbage in, garbage out. And the models that are really successful, the ones I'm going to talk about, they're usually built on vast, well-curated data sets. I was reading yesterday a blog from OpenAI. They've just launched a new automated speech recognition system called Whisper. it was trained on 680,000 hours of speech, which I worked out was about 77 years of speech. That's a lot of data. And needing those volumes of data to train the models is something I'll come back to. So there are limitations to these models, and there's a lot of active research in all of these areas, but some of them are, bias and explainability particularly are still very, very active areas of research, and there's nothing really off the shelf to help you with that. But I'm going to talk about the practicalities of how you deliver. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the tools that make it, I'm going to say, too easy to build models and to make you forget to be critical. So next slide, please. So AI, deep learning in particular, has really blown up in the last 5 years. There's huge advances. A large part of it goes back to a paper called Attention is All You Need, which was published in 2017, and it introduced the concept of attention and transformer networks to natural language processing. You don't need to know what those are. All you need to know is it completely transformed the capability of these models. It completely, well, no, not it, and it's relatively recent. Attention is All You Need came out in 2017. On the back of that, a lot of Google released a model called BERT, and then not long after that, OpenAI released GPT-2 and GPT-3, and Microsoft, I can't remember what I think it was Turing was their model, but attention and transformers, it's a very recent technological advance, and it's really changed things. And you have a lot of these models built on this. And then next slide, please. And then at about the same time, 2016, there was something called YOLO, You Only Look Once, that was released. I should say these models apart from the GPT, the OpenAI's GPT family, they're all open source models. YOLO is an object detection model. You give it an image, and it will find the objects in the image and tell you what they are. Like you can see, it's bounding boxes around cars and bicycles and traffic lights in this. There's about 80 classes of objects it can label. And these are what are called pre-trained foundational models, and they've really transformed deep learning. Next slide, please. And then there's APIs out there. There's something called Hugging Face, a Python package where you can access all of the NLP models, the BERT models, the GPT-2 models. And then there's a separate library for YOLO. There's another library called Spacey, which does a lot of natural language processing. And they have these foundational models in the background. And there's some key things about these foundational models. The general models, they don't do just one thing. So where we talked before about image recognition, is this image a cat or a dot? Is it a cat or not a cat? That model's doing one thing. But these, particularly NLP models, they can do multiple things. They can answer questions about the text. They can summarize the text. They can fill in missing words. They can label named entities. This one model can do multiple applications. And they talk about once you've got that, you can then do this pre-trained model. You can do what's called transfer learning. So you can transfer what it's learned to your application. And you do that by doing fine tuning. There's lots of talk about zero-shot learning, which is what that means is you take their model as it is and you just apply it to your problem. In practice, it's more often something like one or few-shot learning, where you show a few examples and it quickly learns what's special about your example, and then you can use it for your application. So you've got this pre-trained model that's been built that you then take a small set of data for your data set, for your application, and you fine-tune the model to work on your data set, and it makes it very, very easy, very quick to to start applying these models to your problem and your domain. And the reason it can do it is there's been a massive investment in training the models. They train on vast volumes of data. Things like BERT and GPT-2 and GPT-3, the NLP ones, they basically trolled the entire internet. They put web crawlers out there. They harvested all of the web pages, all of the user groups, and that was the training data. and I think it was GPT-2. It was trained on 10,000 GPUs for 6 months to train it. So there's a huge investment. You can know, I don't think anybody in this talk to replicate that training, but then they give you the model and it's pre-trained and then you just fine tune it. So you can see you've got this really high quality model. You don't need to use API, so it's very easy to then pick it up and apply AI to your application area, to your problem area. There's a slight downside to that because only the tech giants, the likes of Google, AWS, Microsoft, OpenAI, because only they can invest in these models, it does give them advantage. And there's a question about how democratic the AI is. There's a paper, I've desperately tried to find the paper, but I definitely remember reading this. At the time that I think it was GPT-2 was released, they acknowledged that there's an error in the model, but having trained it on 10,000 for GPUs for 6 months, they just couldn't afford the millions of dollars to retrain it and fix the error, and they just had to acknowledge that that error was there. But the key thing is these models exist, they make it really easy to do it. But it can be even easier. Next slide, please. You can have what's called AutoML. AutoML, you give AutoML the data, you give it some labeled data, and it goes away. And it tries lots of different models, it tries lots of different parameters for the models, and it'll churn away for hours, days, weeks, and it'll come back and say, this is the best model for your data. And this is the best set of settings for your data. So sometimes it'll tell you what that model is, sometimes it won't. It'll just say, here's a model. I'm not going to tell you what this model is. So you've got a black box and a black box almost. So you have even less understanding of what's happening in the background. Next slide, please. And then if that's too much for you, you've got what's now low code or no code ML. So prior to this, I all assumed you had to write some Python, a little bit of Python, get it running. With the likes of Data IQ, and I think, if I remember, this is AWS's Canvas. It's drag and drop, it's dashboards to train your model. And what this does, it puts the power of building these models into analysts and business people rather than the data scientists, which is great when it works. But you think about explainability, you think about interpretability, you think about bias. You're so far abstracted from the model, you don't really know why it's doing what it's doing. And next slide, please. And this comes to, well, actually, how is it then easy is it to deliver? And I've put, what do you do when your F1 is 0.5? So F1 is a measure of performance. It goes from 0 to 1. 0 means the model's terrible, 1 means the model's perfect. And if your model's storing an F1 of 1, and it's perfect, there's a reason you should be suspicious, but you want the F1 to be as high as possible. A business owner will often say, I want an F1 of 0.75. I've read somewhere 0.75 is really good. Or sometimes when I said I've read 0.75 is really good, then disappointed if it's less than 0.8. But what happens when it's 0.5? You've got this model, you're sort of quite severely abstracted from it. It's effectively black box. What do you do? Next slide, please. So the key thing is the data. In sort of these foundational models, often the only thing you can play with is the data. That's your only lever to improve model performance. And this is an example of some training data for a multi-label problem. And this is the kind of problems I want to talk about in a bit more detail. So here you've got an invoice, and what you want to do is, previously you had, and I'm describing the process for a cluster of mine, you get these invoices and someone would manually sit down and say, oh, that's the seller's name, write a PDF, I'll put that in that cell in the Excel spreadsheet. Or on the invoice date is the 31st of January 2017, I'll put that in the Excel, and it's a very manual, slow process, and it slows down the whole flow of money through a business. But what we're trying to do here is get a deep learning model that can automatically work out what the key bits of data are across this invoice, pull it out automatically populate the Excel spreadsheet, automates the process, means that the person entering the data can now do more value-added things with the information they've got, and they're not spending so much time filling it in. So this is what label this up manually. Send some examples to the model to fine tune it, and it will fine tune and learn how to find these things on this. But I'm getting an F1 of F.5, so it's not doing very well. So what could be the cause of this? What are the things that we need to think about? So next slide, please. So the first thing is to think about the distribution of your data. And this simple graphic is the blue is the distribution of the data that the model's been trained on. So if like BERT or GPT-2, it's the internet, and all the joy that is the internet. And the sort of the orangey color, perhaps, is your training data, and how much do they overlap? So if you think about, let's think about BERT, it's been trained on the internet, possibly things like Facebook posts, Reddit posts, and then I've got an application looking at invoices. Invoices look very different to Facebook posts, to blog posts, to news articles, etc. So you need to think about how well does it overlap, and what can you do to your data what do you need to do to your data? Where do you need to focus your data to improve the quality? It's all about improving the quality of the data that you've got. We'll talk a bit about getting more data in a second. As an example, completely unrelated to invoices, of where I did some fine tuning, we encountered problems, was with YOLO. Did something with the YOLO, you only look once, object detection model, and I was looking. We were doing a proof of concept. Could we use this to identify military aircrafts, particularly fixed wing versus rotary wing, so helicopters versus planes? And YOLO, like I said, has 80 predefined classes, so it knows what a plane looks like. So it can identify planes really well, but it's never looked at helicopters, and it really struggled with helicopters. And I can't remember why we did this, but we put a picture of the Trutty Sergeant in there, which are old sailing yacht with all the rigging in that, and it thought it was a helicopter. It was very confident it was a helicopter. So, the sort of things that come from that is that if you're trying to learn classes that it doesn't know, you've got to make sure you've got lots of good quality data of that class, and you also need to make sure you put in examples of things that are not in that class that might look like it, so it can start to learn the differences. And you come back to like the huskies and the wolves. You don't just need pictures of huskies and wolves. You need pictures of huskies and wolves on different backgrounds, and that mix of backgrounds needs to be across huskies and wolves. So there's a key thing here about understanding the data and the quality of the data. Next slide, please. So I'm kind of talking about multi-label problems here. So if you think about this invoice, you'll label multiple things there, and you've got lots of examples, and some will have some of the labels on, some will not have some of the labels on. And this chart here is on the bottom left, is a distribution of labels for some work I was doing earlier in the year. There's about 45 labels, and we had about 300 or so documents that we were trying to label. And as you can see on the left, some of the labels were in almost every document, but some of the labels on the right were much rarer. And the model is the more common labels in your trained data is going to find the model to find easy to learn. It's going to struggle with the ones where you've got very few examples. But often those rare examples are the ones that you're really interested, or the customer's really interested in. So you need to be aware of this label imbalance. And I'll keep coming back to how you can identify the impact it has and what you can do about it as we go through the slides. Next slide, please. And coming back to talk about the distributions match, the labels, is the label imbalance, and we need to think about if this, but also we need to think about the quality and the consistency and the accuracy of the labeling. So when you generate labeled data, often you'll have a labeling team. You'll have multiple people. For the project I did at the start of the year, some of the InWisdom team were doing the labeling, some of the customer's product team were doing the labeling, but they also had an offshore team doing the labeling. And you've got to ask yourself, is everyone clear what needs to be labeled and what doesn't need to be labeled? So if you look on this this example here, which is a clinical trial, I think, protocol, and the right-hand most one of the blue boxes is around a date, and so we want to label that date. But there's another date up in the sort of like 2/3 of the way up on the right, and there's a third date right at the top right of this, and it's like, well, which date do we want? And are we clear to the labelers which date that we want? Because what can happen, and what I saw is that sometimes some of these documents I were looking at like 70 pages long. Some of them might come through completely, none of the pages are labeled. And there's a distinction between this saying there's no label on this page and saying it's not being labeled. And with all the pages are unlabeled, that's fine, because that means, the job's just not being done. But sometimes some of the pages were labeled, some of them weren't. Well, if you jut that to the model will just, standard imputation, you'll just say, if it's unlabeled, just says none there, but it might be not that it's none. They might have skipped the page, they might have missed it, so they might have mislabeling something they should have done. Also, what we found was that the same document might be labeled twice, and the two labelers had labeled it differently. So which one's right? Sometimes there's consistency, sometimes there wasn't. And also we encountered over-labeling. I was looking at insurance documents, and one of the key things was the unique reference number. So the contracts, and each one had a unique reference number, and it was usually on page 1 or 2, and it should appear once in the document. But we were getting some documents where it's labeled 20 times or 60 times or 70 times. And part of the problem there was that sometimes the contract would have the reference number in the footer of every page, and people would be labeling every one of those as well. And so you're confusing the model about what it needs to learn. It needs a strong signal. It needs to be really clear. This is what the unique reference number looks like. This is about where it comes, so you can learn it. But otherwise, if you're all these sort of inconsistencies in labelings, this over-labeling, different labelings, it's learning different things, and it makes it hard to learn what you want it to learn. A lot of this can be handled by actually doing proper in-depth exploratory data analysis beforehand, actually understanding the data and validating what you've got and validating the labelling that you've got before you start to do the training. But the key message here is that it's all about the data. We just keep coming back to the data. The data is the key thing that will make these models work better and improve their performance. So next slide, please. So what I want to do now is get under the hood a bit of how the model performs and the things you need to think about. So you've got a model, it's got an F1 of 0.5, you're not happy with it, but what does that mean, and what can you learn about how the model's performing, assuming multiple labels, but understand how the model's performing to understand where to focus your efforts. So it's not just about generating lots and lots of more data, it's about targeted interventions to generate the data that will help you. So next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the confusion matrix. Apologies if this is very familiar to you, but I assumed that I'm building up to explain something a bit more detail. I want to be clear that everyone knows what this is. So what we've got here, we're thinking about one label, in particular date. We want to know whether there's a date or not a date on this page. And the rows, so that what's actually true. Is there a date, is there not a date? And the columns are what the model then predicts. So next slide, please. So yes. Yeah. So this is an example of some labeled data. We've highlighted the date in this data. This is what there is a date. This is the date that we're interested in. Next slide, please. So there's actually date there. And if the model predicts the date there, then we call it a true positive. We say it's got it right. It's the date there, and it says the date there, and we're interested in how often it does that in all of the examples. Next slide, please. We also have what's called a false negative, where we've got an example where there is a date, but the model's not predicted it. and we want these to be as low as possible. Next slide. And now we've got what's called a false positive, where there's no dates in this at all, but the model's picked this up, and it's that it's probably thought this is the 6th of February 1995. It said there's a date there, and we don't want it to do that. Wouldn't be false positives. Next slide, please. And now we have true negatives, where there's no date on the page, and it's not predicted the date, so it's got that right. So we want the diagonal, the true positive and true negative, to be high, a high count, and the other diagonal, the false positive and false negative, to be a low count. And that starts to give you an insight of what's happening in the model and where you need to focus your efforts. But there's other summary metrics you can define. Next slide, please. You can define the precision, which is the number of labels, predicted labels that were right. So how many of times when it said there's a label there, was there actually a label there? There's actually a date there. And you can also have, next slide, please. The retort, which is the number of correctly predicted labels. So this is when there was a label there, how often did it actually say there was a label there? And then you can combine those two metrics in something called F1, which gives you an overall score of how well the model is doing. So next slide, please. And this is just some examples of the data that at a label level, this is a problem with 9 labels that you can get. You can get the confusion matrix, the true positive, false positive, etc. You can calculate the precision and recall, and then the F1 score for all of these. But one of the challenges you have is that when you use sort of AutoML, black box models, low code models, often you'll just get a single F1 score, which is a summary F1 score across all of the labels. And there's 2 ways to do that. One is just to average all of the individual label stores, which is called the macro F1. And for this data, that's 0.5. There's then a micro F1 where you sum up the columns of the confusion matrix and then use those figures to calculate F1. That gives you an F1 score for this model of 0.64. And both of those say, actually, this model's not doing great. But when you look at labels 1, 2, and 3, they're doing quite well. But overall, if you just look at that overall F1 score, you're kind of stuck about, well, where do you need to put the effort in? There's no point, or there's little value in putting effort into label 1 because it's at 0.86. But label 9 at 0.34, if you can improve the data that it's seeing of those labels, then that can have a big impact on your model. So you can start to look at the F1 score of individual labels. Next slide, please. But then if you look at labels 2 and 3, their F1 score is very close. But then you look at the precision and recall, and they're behaving very, very differently. Label 2 has got a really good recall. So when it predicts labels, it's doing quite well. It's got very few false negatives and a lot of true positives. Where in contrast, I'm pausing because I have a tendency to precision recall the wrong way around. The precision, a lot of the predicted labels are good. So 248 compared to 14, when it predicts a label, or when there's a label there, I don't know. When it predicts a label, you're confident that it's actually a label there. So they've got the same F1 score, but the behavior is very different between those two. So even just going down the F1 score is not always enough to understand what's happening with the data, to understand where to target your efforts. So next slide, please. And if we just look at label 1, we can use this as an example of something else you need to consider, which is, I've talked about imbalance between the labels across the whole data set. But when you train the model, you split it into a train, test, and split. So train, validation, and test, split. So what you do, you train the model with a training data set, which is usually 60 or 80% of your data, and you use the validation set to check its performance, to check its generalized, it's not overfitting as you go along, and then you use the test, or sometimes called a holdout, at the very end to determine how well the model will perform on examples it's never seen before. And that's the real metric of actual performance. But where you've got label 1 here, where it's actually got 12 examples out of maybe just about nearly 600. If you just do a random split between train, validation, and test, there's a chance all of those 12 examples will sit in one of those splits. So if they all sit in the training set, it will train on those labels, do really well on those labels in training. But when you do tests, they're not there. So it says, it's about an F1 of 0, which says perform really well. So that gives you a bad view of what's actually happening. And in contrast, if all of those 12 happen to sit in test, the model will never see it during training. So then you'll evaluate against something it's not trained against, and so then the performance will be really bad. So you need to think about, particularly when you've got low numbers of labels, stratifying those trained validation test sets and making sure the distribution of labels is broadly consistent. And this is all about helping to focus you on where to look at your data to improve your model. Next slide, please. So label formed used an example of something called about subpopulations. So far I've assumed all of the data is comparable. It's all a single distribution, basically, a unimodal distribution. But you might have let's say two subpopulations in that. If you think about the invoicing, let's think about an insurance example, the insurance contracts, where you're trying to label the key data points in those documents. Those insurance, I'm thinking about commercial insurance here, they may come from different brokers. So if you've got two different brokers sending you contracts, they may have a different format to their documents. And your model may do really well on one broker's format and poorly on another one. So in this case, you've got 8 true positives. That might be broker A, and it might do really well. And the 4 false negatives might be broker B, and it does really poorly on broker B. And it might be you only have 4 examples of broker B, but you have 500 examples of broker A. And so again, it's another layer where you dig into the data to understand what's happening. And then next slide, please. This is the last build on this one. And then the last thing I was just going to mention, it's a slight step in where Josh, I'm running out of time, sorry. I'm barely through it. I better speed up. So just going to say with this, as well as the data, what we can consider is for a label like this, it might do really well poorly on this model, but there might be another model that looks at it differently, and you can have multiple models linked together and then combine those. Next slide, please. This is my penultimate slide. So this is about, so we've looked at how you can focus on issues in the data and work out where the issues are, but how can you fix them? Next slide, please. Yeah, let's skip this. Next slide. So one thing you can think about is data augmentation and taking the data you've got and creating new examples from it. Now, in imagery, it's there's a lot of research and there's lots of simple things you can do. You can take your original image, you can flip it, you can rotate it, crop it, change the color a bit. There's various things you can do with the image, and it's still an image of the thing you want, and it works. And there's a lot of work being done on that. But if we next slide, please. With textual data, it's much harder. So if you look at the cat, if you make it grayscale and flip it, it's still a cat. It's fairly obvious. But if you shuffle the words in a sentence, you can completely change the meaning of the sentence. And there's a lot of active research into data augmentation and how you can augment textual data. Next slide, please. Rather than shuffling the words, if you shuffle sentences, that can still keep the meaning. Still a slight risk. I'm sure you can think of examples where shuffling a sentence will change the meaning, but it's another way you can do it. Next slide, please. One much more useful way is what's called lexical substitution, which is about keeping the semantic meaning. And here you have a concept of, you've got the word awesome and you want words that are close to awesome in meaning, and substitute the word awesome. So it's amazing, it's perfect, it's fantastic, it's pretty much the same meaning. Other ways you can do it, you can do what's called back translation. You can take the sentence, it is awesome, translate into Spanish, translate from Spanish back to English, and what you get is, it's amazing. And you can then do that for Italian, for German. I did have a bit of play last night with this, and I realized that you need to use languages that are sort of, in terms of language, the language families are close to each other. So I tried Sepedi, which is also known as Bantu, which is a language from Niger and Tondro. And if you do a back translation, it is awesome becomes it's terrible, which is completely opposite meaning. So you've got to be careful with that. But there are lots of ways you can tweak the model, tweak the language, and tweak its text, keeping the same meaning, so that you augment your data samples and get more from the data that you've got. Because you could go out and label more data, you could generate more data, have a more intense QA process, but there's the trade-off of the cost of labeling. Labeling with humans is quite expensive. There's that trade-off between that cost and actually an improvement in the performance of the model, where these augmentation methods allow you to do it much more cheaply, and there are libraries out there that are designed to do these kind of things. Next slide, please. One of the key things when we talk about this data augmentation is making sure it's amazing, it's awesome, is one sentence, but when you get a structured document like this, you need to make sure that you're changing the individual things in the right way, and there's linkages between labels. Plus, you can modify the labels. I can put different seller ID in, I can put different invoice values in, but you need to be careful that the bits that you're not labeling, you're modifying and augmenting them as well. Because one thing you could do is you could just the highlighted labels. You could take this invoice and just change the seller, change the invoice value, change the invoice number, and generate lots of examples. But if you leave the address the same, the risk is the model will learn that the seller's ID is next to the address you see here, rather than an address, and so perform really, really well in training. But then when you deploy it into operations, it will not perform as well. Next slide, please. And I shall now wrap this up. So, and next slide. So what I've been trying to say through all of this is we need to take a data-centric approach to AI and to how we use these powerful models and get the best from them. It's all about the data. Traditionally, if I can say that, it's been a model-centric approach. You collect as much data as you can, you do some pre-processing the model, the data then fits, and you spend all your time tuning the model and trying to optimize the model to deal with the noise in your data. The data-centric approach, in contrast, is about pretty much fixing the model, but making sure you have the best quality data and you make the most of that data. And it's kind of removing the noise from the data. So apologies for overrunning slightly, but it's all about the data. And with these black box models, the data is the only lever you've got, so you've got to invest in that. And really, my sort of in summary is AI has huge potential to transform things. There's some very, very powerful tools that make it easy to start, but to deliver on that promise, you need to understand what the models are doing, when they're underperforming, where they're underperforming, and the focus then becomes the data. And that's me. And my promise to do it in 30 to 40 minutes, I've completely blown that. So I haven't got much time left for questions, but happy to take them. Happy to stay on for as long as people want to.
Hi, Andy. Right, sorry about that. I was just coming out the slides. That was absolutely brilliant now. And I really enjoyed that. I think everyone else did as well. I just wanted to say, cool. I just wanted to say thank you very much. Like you've indicated, I do need to go now myself, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But I might have a question for you that I want to send through an email.
I'm happy for people to send questions via emails after the talk.
Yeah, so if you could drop us
and can I just say to everyone, as far as I'm aware, the OR Society is running this. So, if you want to stay on for a little while, if you've got the time to stay on, then please do so. But I'm unfortunately going to have to go. But thank you very much, Andy. And thank you very much for everyone attending. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could drop your email also, Andy, that would be fine. So I could also drop a mail.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I'll put it in the chat. And I know Dan's got it as well. Oops. Yeah. Yep, there we go. Yeah, happy to take questions via email. Happy to take questions now if people want to have anything.
Okay. I'll push a question across to your email, so I need to rush out. All right.
No problem.
And thank you very much, Andy. Thanks for the presentation, Andy.
No worries.
Bye. Cheers.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that's me. Cool. I've got it already.